2014. If it's in a word or it's in a look, you can't get rid of the Babadook. A rumbling sound, then 3 sharp knocks.
Babadook, duk, duk.
That's when you'll know he's around. You'll see him if you look. Join me as we complete our journey through the evolution of the ghost story, and we review 2 haunting modern-day masterpieces, Babak Anvari's Under the Shadow and Jennifer Kent's The Babadook.
You can bring me the boy. You can bring me the boy.
Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres across a series of weeks. We are currently in the middle of exploring the evolution of the ghost story, and this is episode 19, in which we are going to review the final 2 movies in our series about ghosts, The Babadook and Under the Shadow. These will be 2 spoilerific reviews. We will be talking about both movies in depth, both movies from beginning to end. So if you haven't seen these 2 movies, please give yourself a treat and go and watch them both. They are both absolute masterpieces and would make a great double bill. They complement each other very well. Before we get started, here are a few contact details. You can email us. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter @evolutionpod or on Facebook. That's facebook.com/evolution of horror. Next week is going to be the last episode in the series, and we're going to be counting down my top 10 ghost movies as well as yours. And so I'd love to hear from you guys. If you get a chance, please tweet me or email me your top 5 or top 10 ghost movies of all time, and then I can add it to the mix. Or even if you don't want to compile a list, just send me your favourite ever supernatural ghost movie and why. I'd love to hear from you guys. So as I say, please do email or tweet and get in touch. But on with this week's show, we've got so much interesting stuff to discuss. And joining me to talk about The Babadook and Under the Shadow is a brilliant film critic. She's been on the podcast before discussing my favourite slasher movie with me, Black Christmas, and now she's back to join me for a discussion of 2 of my favourite ghost movies. I didn't have to travel very far to go and find her. I was able to go straight to her house because her house is also my house. It is the brilliant Rhianna Dhillon. Rhianna, welcome back.
Hi.
Hi. It always feels very formal when I call you
God, that
Rhianna
was so
Dhillon.
weird. I've never heard you say my full name aloud before.
Yeah, do you like it?
No.
Okay,
Stop
fine.
it.
I won't do it anymore.
Just call me darling like you do normally.
Yeah, exactly. We're currently sort of huddled in our freezing cold flats.
I
right
know,
now, aren't
the
we?
glamour. I mean, normally you're at the BFI. I mean, admittedly in a cupboard.
Yeah, exactly.
But now
Always somewhere quite horrible, actually, most of the time.
I feel like this is... I mean, it should be lovely, but we are in our flat and it's so cold and rainy and we're both under duvets.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, it's like kind of quite fitting to talk about ghost stories when you're kind of
That's
cooped
true.
up on a cold day under a blanket,
Yes.
which is what we are right now.
We're very isolated from the outside world.
Yeah, except that we can hear our neighbours directly above us.
Yeah,
walking
they're really
around.
loud.
Yeah,
Apologies
so
in advance.
not quite so isolated. So last time you were here, we were talking about slasher movies, and
God,
even
were
though
we? I can't even remember.
we were,
It was so long ago.
It was a long time ago. We were talking about Black Christmas.
Oh, yes.
And
Yeah.
you mentioned then that even though you're not the biggest horror fan, you always found slashers quite fun.
Yes,
and
slashers are
easier to
fun.
watch. What do you think of these movies then? Ghost movies, haunted house things, that kind of thing.
I feel like since we've been together, you have made it your mission in life to open my mind up to horror films, basically, because I am one of those people that if everyone was like, what kind of films don't you like, I'd always be like, horror. Not for any sort of like snobby reason, but just because I'm so scared.
Yes.
And I still am, but you've kind of made me watch so many over the past 3.5 years.
Sorry about that.
You're not sorry at all. That yeah, I guess I'm slightly more used to them now. So so with ghost movies, I mean, I watched The Others at the cinema, and
you watched The Haunting, didn't you?
I
Remake.
watched the remake of The Haunting and actually really enjoyed it. I mean, I watched it quite young, but like even then I could really appreciate Owen Wilson's head being knocked off by a massive stone lion.
Yes, it's a highlight for everyone.
Yes.
Yeah.
How come that wasn't in the original? So I have now since watched the original, The Haunting. And so I feel like I do know a lot more about ghost stories than I ever thought I would.
But these are the ones that are, most people that have been talking to me about ghost stories so far always say, oh, these are the ones that scare me the most. And, you know, that's why I did wonder with these movies, are these going to be harder for you to watch than the average? Because like you say, slashers are more kind of fun and silly.
Yeah.
These movies are properly jumpy and scary, aren't they?
It's weird, isn't it? Because with ghosts, I don't believe in ghosts. And so you think, actually, they shouldn't be as scary because I know that it's all just in my mind or in the film's imagination, whatever. Whereas in slashers, actually serial killers do exist.
Yes.
And so it's that weird thing where actually real life should be more scary, but somehow isn't. I think because your imagination knows no bounds when it comes to ghost stories, and so much of it, especially some of the ones we've seen, are in dark rooms in your home where you should be safe.
Yes.
And some unknown entity that comes in and you don't know how to stop it. You can't get rid of it. And that's quite scary. Not so much about an actual ghost, but just the idea of anything infiltrating your safe space.
Definitely.
Is quite horrible.
And I think just it's the style in which they're made, isn't it? Because even though, like you say, yes, slashers in theory, that could happen.
Yeah.
You'd never think that from watching a slasher movie because they're done in such an over-the-top manner. Usually with kind of the characters are, you know, archetypes more than they are real people. Whereas I think with ghost stories, you feel like you get a real sense of character, especially in the movies we're about to talk about. It's like these are properly well-drawn, three-dimensional people. The setup, even though, like you say, ghosts aren't real, or we don't believe they are, it somehow still feels more realistic than a slasher movie in the way it's done.
I love that you have to sort of qualify that with, well, we don't believe that they're real.
Well, you never know.
Ghosts aren't real.
You never know. But have you ever had any experience where you thought, what the fuck was that? Like woken up in the night, seen something, heard a noise?
But so after we watched Gerald's Game, which was on Netflix,
which really did terrify you.
I couldn't sleep. Like that was that most recently, that was the film, like probably since I was a child, that terrified me so much. Because even more than just being stuck in a room or in a house, she's stuck in a bed. Yeah. And so when you're lying in bed, that's all you can think about. Yeah. And so I did see something that night, which obviously wasn't really there. It was so real, and I really freaked out. You didn't wake up, helpfully.
But at no point did you ever think it's a ghost.
No.
Your worst case scenario would be that there's a man.
Yeah, always. If I've ever seen anything in the bedroom, which actually happens quite a lot because our room has this light coming through and we have a lot of clothes hanging up, which means that sometimes it looks like a figure. I would never think it's something, you know, paranormal, exactly. It's always like someone's in the room.
Yes, it's usually a mouse in our room, to be honest. Is any unusual noise.
My favourite time of that was when I took you to Amsterdam and the curtains were really annoying me and blowing in the middle of the night, so I decided to like try and stop them, put something heavy there, and all I had was my shoe. So I had to get up in the middle of the night, and it was a small room, and I came over to your side where the windows were, and you woke up to me basically standing above you with a shoe.
With a shoe. That was really terrifying.
And you yelled, and then I screamed.
Oh my God.
That was funny.
That was a disturbing experience in Amsterdam. Luckily, we hadn't been smoking anything too heavy at that particular moment, and there was no paranoia kind of emphasising that moment.
Did you think I was a ghost, an entity then?
Yes.
Come through the window?
I think I just thought you'd had a bit of a funny turn or sleptwalk or something. I was like, oh my God, she's lost it. Yeah, it's just funny because, even though 90% of the people I've spoken to so far have said they don't believe in ghosts, but then there are always people like Jacob Stolworthy, who was on it a couple of weeks ago talking about paranormal activity. And he was saying, no, I don't believe. And then we were talking about doing Ouija boards, and he said, oh, I'd never do a Ouija board.
Oh,
and it's like, well, there must be some part of you. And a lot of people have said things like that. There's always that.
I would love to do a Ouija board.
Me too. Well, we should do one.
We should do one.
There's always that little element at the back of your mind, with a lot of people at least, that is like, well, maybe, how can we explain this or that or whatever?
It's so funny, isn't it? Because just being scared is such a weird thing when you're sitting at home on your sofa watching a film. Yeah. Because that whatever is happening in the TV, whether it can be real in the real world or not, can't hurt you. And so I don't know why I get myself so worked up into such a state where I have to like dive like underneath your armpit so I can't see anything. Or like when I'm in a cinema, my classic is just to jam my fingers in my ears, and then I can just about watch it if I can't hear what's going on.
It's the noises, it's the jumpiness, isn't it? And especially, again, what we've discovered, I think, is that these ghost stories fall into two camps, and it's either like the ghost train kind of experience, like James Wan's movies, The Conjuring, Annabelle, The Nun, Insidious, these types of movies where it's like there's not really much depth or subtext. It is just you're there to jump out of your skin, basically. And there's a few movies in the past like that, like House on Haunted Hill and things like that. And then there are these other ones, like I think more the two that we're going to speak about tonight, which is they're more subtle and character based and sometimes more psychological.
And I really love psychological films. Actually,
Spanish movies like The Orphanage have a lot of that, and The Changeling from the 80s, and The Innocents and The Haunting as well. These movies that are actually more about maybe grief or loss or memory or some kind of psyche problem, psychological
that's
problem.
it. That's where it becomes so real. So even it doesn't matter whether you believe in ghosts or not. You do know that these things like grief and trauma exist, and so the effects on what that has on especially women in these films we're going to be talking about, it's really fascinating, really interesting to see how that plays out, how it manifests itself. And I think that's what's really scary, watching it as a woman, thinking like the whole idea of a hysterical woman and not being believed if this were to happen to you.
Exactly. Which leads nicely into the first movie then that we're going to talk about. So The Babadook.
You all right?
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
You don't have to be fine, you know.
Just a bit stressed at the moment.
All children see monsters.
Not like this. I want to report someone stalking me and my child.
You can't get rid of the Babadook.
You can bring me the boy. You can bring me the boy. You can bring me the boy.
What do you want? You're trespassing in my house! I'm sick, Sam. I need help.
So Amelia is a single mother to Sam, who's 6, and they're in this sort of massive Victorian house. It's set in Australia. It's an Australian film, but it doesn't feel very Australian. It feels like it could be anywhere. Which was definitely deliberate. So they're in this house. There's no husband. We found out quite early on that the husband has died while he was taking Amelia to the hospital while she was in labour with Sam in a car crash. So it kind of is a very, very traumatic. We kind of see it in the opening scene.
Yes, literally how the film begins.
As her sort of she's remembering it, she's dreaming it. And anyway, so they find this book, The Babadook, that she reads to her son at night, and it's like a pop-up book, and it's such a dark, graphic children's book, but depicting some really dark, nasty images, including some of her like killing a dog, strangling her son. Like, it just gets darker and darker. So she tries to get rid of this book, and it keeps coming back, and Sam believes that the Babadook is real, and she has to keep sort of telling him that these aren't real, and then obviously it begins to manifest itself. We don't know whether in her mind or in reality, this horrible dark creature with long pointed fingers and a massive hat and big white eyes and sharp teeth. And it's terrifying how, like, it's just a drawing, it's just a cartoon, but how scary it is, how much it stays with you.
Yes, it's incredible, isn't it? It's like it's rare that it still happens in horror, but it's like a new monster has been invented.
It is
a new
monster.
iconic monster. Everyone knows what the Babadook is. Like everyone knows what Freddy Krueger is now. And it's only one film, and hopefully there will never be a sequel. But
no, so I read that there never will be, because she was like, I own the rights to this. I am never ever going to let them make a sequel of it. Doesn't need one, no matter how much money they offer me.
That's so wonderful.
Which is just such good news,
Because the point of it is it's not supposed to be about this monster.
No.
Yeah. It's supposed to be about this woman.
Yes.
So amazing.
So the lead is Essie Davis, who I've only really seen in Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries, which is a sort of guilty pleasure Netflix series that I watched.
I always saw you watching
Australian.
this and it looked terrible.
I know, but it was so fun. She was so fun. But she's married to Justin Herzl, who directed Snowtown.
Which is quite a disturbing movie.
Which is really disturbing. And she also went to drama school with the director Jennifer Kent. So Jennifer Kent is her debut film, and it started off with a short film, Monster.
Yes.
So you've seen Monster, haven't you?
Yes.
And I just watched it, and it's black and white.
Yeah.
And it's just it's like a real sped up version. It's only 10 minutes. It's like a sped up version of the Babadook. And I didn't think it was great, but then having seen the Babadook, it was like each sort of frame was being given room to breathe in the Babadook, whereas it wasn't in the Monster.
Yes.
You know, so it just felt like the Babadook is a much more sort of mature version of Monster.
Definitely. Yeah, and actually, you know, with some movies you kind of think, oh, this should have stayed as a short film, or or you can tell a movie is a short film stretched out to 90 minutes, whereas the Babadook doesn't feel like that.
Not at all.
It's earned its feature length.
Yeah. But I really like sort of all these little connections between how this film got made in the first place, because it feels like a very sort of intimate film. You know, there are only like 2 or 3 main characters in it.
It's basically this woman and her son, isn't it, throughout the whole movie? Yeah.
And you know, I love that they all kind of had this reference point that, you know, they trusted each other to make it, and it was so successful. I think because of that, it was brilliant foundations that it was built on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you can tell that, you know, Essie Davis is incredible in it.
Yeah.
And there's clearly quite and same with the little boy, it must have had like that quite safe, nurturing filming environment, because it's a pretty tough performance she has to give, and it's quite raw, and it's very kind of, she really sort of bears all in it, doesn't she? And the stuff she has to do and she has to go through, and the same with the little boy, really. And it's like, it must have been a kind of, I mean, she must just be an incredible director, I think, Jennifer Kent, in the way she got these performances out of this mother and son.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So what do you think, first of all? Are you a fan of this movie?
So when we first saw it, I was impressed, as you know, from a psychological thriller point of view.
Yes.
I thought it was excellent, and was scary, but I don't think I really sort of appreciated the subtleties of it until I rewatched it again for this, and I just kind of picked up on so much more of, you know, the cinematography and the background, and like the amount of, like, in every frame almost there's something lurking, the layers that have clearly gone into this, you know. So this woman is essentially an insomniac, and you feel that with every shot, you know. You, like, I was getting really like sleepy watching it, not because it was boring, but you know, when you're watching somebody who's so exhausted, and it looks like every movement is just really taking out of her, it's draining her, but then mixed with the color scheme, which is very like washed out and grey and pale blue, and it almost makes the viewer feel a bit sick with tiredness, because Essie Davis's performance is so brilliant.
88, number 88. 2 fat ladies. Good, Elaine. Another few days and someone could call out bingo.
Yeah, you're right. The cinematography in this movie is just phenomenal. I think, as far as like everything that's put in the frame and the way it's shot, is one of the greatest ever horror movies, I think. Just the color palette, the way everything is like washed out, like you say, it does make you feel sleepy and kind of nauseous. And you're right, it's an Australian movie, but it doesn't really feel like it's set in anywhere specific.
No,
you get a lot of Australian movies, horror movies like Wolf Creek and stuff like that are so about Australia and the outback, and they have that Australia colour palette almost. Everything's kind of quite bright and yellow and deserty, orangey. And actually, what Under the Shadow that we're going to talk about it's so specific that it's about Iran, and that's where it's set. Whereas it could be any house anywhere, couldn't it?
Yeah, they sort of built, I think, like a Victorian house, even though those sorts of houses don't really exist in where they were imagining that it was set. So it's a cold looking
It's
film.
blue and white,
yeah,
isn't
it's
it?
very cold looking, and then this kind of massive black shadow that is just always in your periphery.
Yeah.
Whether it's the monster, whether it's like a hat and a coat.
Yes.
You know, so and the little boy wears like his magician's outfit.
Yes.
And just all these little hints of the Babadook without actually ever being the Babadook.
Yeah.
Is really, really clever.
It's wonderful, isn't it? Because I think, you see the Babadook maybe about 3 or 4 times in
like
total.
A handful, yeah.
Yeah. And then everything else is, like you say, it's all suggested through shadows and lighting and costumes and props. It's incredible. And it's this weird mix visually of like, it's definitely harking back to sort of silent cinema and German expressionism.
Well, they even have a Georges Méliès kind of montage in it. Amelia is watching the TV to try and keep herself awake, and the Babadook appears in it, and that is fantastic the way they've done that, sort of incorporated, because it's already quite nightmarish, isn't it?
Yes.
All these images and these creepy sort of puppets and that sort of stop motion, which always looks a little bit weird.
Everything's stop motion.
Like the Jodder Man.
Yeah, exactly.
And so then when the Babadook appears, it's almost like, is that? Oh no! That wasn't in the. Oh, well, you know, it throws you, and it's clever and it's subtle, and I love that they've done that.
It taps into the sort of, it's the uncanny, it's the, that looks like a person in a coat, but it's not, or it's, you know.
It's like a parallel universe that is just like a frame off, isn't it?
And it's like, again, so it's like a mix between, silent cinema, but also a children's book. It's like a storybook, and it looks like how the book looks, you know, with those kind of stark, kind of bold black and white drawings.
Yeah, sort of charcoal, isn't it?
Charcoal-y. And again, that's kind of the way the cinematography looks.
Yeah. And
just the way the story is told, it's like a children's story a bit, you know? It's like you can imagine a child, and we can talk about this in a minute, you know, what the Babadook actually is, but it's like a child, you know, writing a story about his mum who has mental health, but he's turned it into this thing called the Babadook.
Yes.
And, you know, this is how we have to deal with it, and we can't let it in, or if we do, we have to feed it and placate it and not, you know, blah, blah, blah.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that.
Will these make the Babadook go away?
I think so, but you have to promise me not to mention it again.
I promise to protect you if you promise to protect me. Then I won't mention it.
I promise to protect you.
So it's like that child's perspective of, you don't know how much of this is real, how much of it is this game that they've concocted to make sense of it all.
Yeah, definitely. It's 100% that, isn't it? That's what it feels like. And even, you know, even though the movie is basically still telling us this is a monster movie, and by the end you still, you know there's this monster.
Yeah.
It's still kind of like, it seems very clear, doesn't it, that it's one giant metaphor sort of thing, but just brilliant, but also not heavy-handed or trying to kind of nudge, wink at you the whole way, that this all means something else, you know, because you could absolutely just take it at face value of, this is a monster movie.
Well, yeah. Okay, so I was watching it pretty much the whole way through going, this is a metaphor.
Yeah.
For sort of like grief, postnatal depression,
I think it is.
Just an amalgamation.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I need to step away from that for a minute.
Yes.
Because you can't make sense of every little thing as being, that's all the mother then, that's all in her head. So this monster, let me try and look at it as like a proper monster movie where this isn't in her head, and that was quite weird actually, and possibly even more terrifying.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it doesn't have to all add up in a way that it all turns out to be psychological, in a way that is like,
I think I'm a bit guilty of trying to make things add up.
I'm trying to think of a movie where it's actually within the narrative, where something all turns out to be in somebody's head.
Like Fight Club.
Exactly. I don't think it's ever doing that. I think the film is intending to be, this monster is real and it's in their house, but there's another layer within it where it's like, actually, you know, Invasion of the Body Snatchers is actually about communism, and this is actually about this, and this is actually about that, and really this, I think it is, like you say, it's about maybe I think it is about depression, isn't it? Basically, I think the Babadook is depression. That's what I make of it.
Yeah, well, I just think that, you know, it's so because so we talked about her husband Oscar, who dies before the film begins, and this is sort of 6 years almost to the day, because it's leading up to Sam's 7th birthday.
Yeah.
And so this whole time, it's like she's survived. She's just been surviving and living, and she literally was a survivor after this crash.
Yes.
And she can't even hear her husband's name mentioned. Her sister brings him up, her neighbour brings him up, and she just can't bear it. You know, she really struggles.
As soon as anyone mentions Oscar, you can't cope.
That's not true.
It'll be 7 years. Isn't it time you moved on?
I have moved on. I don't mention him. I don't talk about him. What strain is that on you, Claire?
So it's obvious that she hasn't come on very far in the grieving process. She hasn't had time to. She hasn't been allowed to, because Sam is just the little boy is just so intense and needs attention at every turn.
Yeah.
And it's like it reaches a crescendo as with this monster. It's like, this is the manifestation of 7 years of grieving, and how much of that her child has picked up on, how much of it is his grief. There's a bit where he says, she won't let me have a birthday party and she won't let me have a dad, because he sort of built up his dad in his head just from the memories that he's found lying around the house. And that's such a heartbreaking moment when you kind of remember that this has affected him as much as it's affected her, even though he never knew his dad. He's always wanted one, and he has an idea of what he might be like, but he's had to piece that together from his clothes and pictures and records and music, rather than anything that his mum might have told him.
Exactly.
And that's really hard to sort of come to terms with.
It is. And you're right, she's never had a chance to deal with it, because this brilliantly, the way this story is told is that he died because she was in labour. He died driving her to the hospital while she was in labour with the son. So there's forever for her that link between the child and the death of her husband. And for as long as she wouldn't have had time to grieve, because she'd have just given birth to her son. And ever since, she's just been looking after her son. And so there's that inability to move on, and then there's also that resentment where every time she looks at Samuel, she sees
the loss of Oscar.
The loss. And so there's just these heartbreaking moments where she won't really say he says I love you, and she sort of says me too, or he tries to hold her or hug her, and the way that it's kind of portrayed is that he's squeezing her too tight, and she's like, get off me, stop squeezing me, and it's horrible, because again, you go through this journey, or I did, of starting off thinking, this little boy is a monster, he's an absolute little shit, and then you just feel more and more just devastated for him, because he just loves his mum and just wants to be there
to be
for
loved
her
in return,
and she just keeps shunning him away, and she can't bear him to even touch her or be near her, and to the point where she would rather just sedate him. And there's that moment, and again, you can kind of understand it on one level, because he screams and shouts and has tantrums, and it's that kind of weird nature nurture thing, isn't it? It's like watching what's it called, Kevin, we need to talk about Kevin. It's that same kind of an argument.
It's so like
where you've got,
actually.
is it the mother's fault or is it the son, and the doctor sort of says, look, most mothers are not comfortable with me giving their children sedatives, but she's just like, please let me, just drug my son.
I need to sleep.
Yeah,
he needs to sleep. But what's interesting about that scene is that he said mothers, not mothers, wouldn't. He doesn't say parents. He says mothers wouldn't like their children being drugged. And I was like, so again, it's that pressure of not parenthood but motherhood. And that's what it all comes down to, is this sort of taboo between, of just being the perfect mother.
Claire, I think someone is stalking me and Samuel.
What?
A book turned up at our place. I threw it away, but somebody glued it back together and put it on our doorstep.
Amelia, I just can't help you right now.
I don't expect you to help. I just want
If you're that worried, you should go to the police.
Aunt Claire is a monster.
She is the monster.
Absolute, real and true monster.
Yeah.
Just, she's so selfish, and she's the worst type of, that's that stereotypical awful mum. And all of her stereotypically awful mum friends who are all like, I barely have time to go to the gym. And they all like look perfectly kind of pruned and groomed. And
How's Richard's merger going?
Oh, good. I mean, his workload's just ballooned. I've got the kids 24/7, it feels like.
Tell me about it.
I don't even have time to go to the gym anymore. It's ridiculous.
That's a real tragedy. Not having time to go to the gym anymore. How do you cope?
You must have so much to talk about with those poor disadvantaged women.
It's like Big Little Lies, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like those mums at the school gates who just try and make other mums feel as like incompetent as possible.
I'm sure that's true.
And that's a horrifying thought, because women, you know, should be there to support each other, and you're all in this together. And there aren't any dads present.
Yeah.
And that's quite interesting, because they're not dead.
Yeah, exactly.
They're all alive,
exactly.
but they're still not there to be at their, you know, kid's birthday party.
Yeah. I think also, like, for all these reasons, that's why I think it works so well as a ghost story, as well as part of a series on ghosts. I know it's not technically, the Babadook is this, I guess you could call it a monster, but, you know, the fact that it basically represents all these other things. I mean, this woman is clearly being haunted by the memory of her dead husband. This whole movie is filled with grief and loss. And, you know, is this thing real? Is it not? Is it psychological? Is this woman out of her mind? Is she this crazy, hysterical woman? Or is there really a monster in her house? It's got all of those key ingredients. And that's what a lot of the old classic ghost movies were really about, you know, the old Victorian ones. Again, we go all the way back to things like The Innocents, The Haunting, even M.R. James to a point. You know, these monsters, these ghouls, these ghosts, even if they weren't technically spirits, they always stood in as something else, as loss, memory, sexual, you know, repression or jealousy or guilt or any of that kind of thing. And they weren't always defined. They were these entities, you know, like the movie The Entity, you know, what was that thing, you know? So yeah, I think, you know, for a number of reasons, this movie could easily be construed as a haunted house movie, and the Babadook could easily be construed as a ghost. The bit that I always find, you know, quite scary is when you first sort of see it, I suppose, because there's the, you know, the story goes, you know, first of all you hear it knock 3 times, and then it's whether or not you let it in. Yes. And again, you know, you talk about that as a metaphor, and but you know, when, you know, she lets it in. And there's that moment when she's lying in bed and she hears it, and you hear it coming, and again, it's that kind of, it's shot so well, it's that kind of shadowy room. The room is vast.
Yeah.
Jennifer Kent has made this room look like a great hall rather than a bedroom. You know, everything, again, it's that expressionism thing. It's like stylized within an inch of its life. And the room seems to go on and on infinitely into darkness. And then this monster turns up and she hides under the covers. But then you hear it, and again, it's just the sound design. It's that. And I remember thinking when I first saw it, oh, please don't look, you know, just. Yes. But what I liked about it was that I thought, you know, a lot of those kind of movies would be, okay, she'd look over the covers, there'd be nothing there, and then it would jump and be right in her face. It doesn't quite do that. No. It kind of appears above her on the ceiling in that kind of weird, shadowy, stop motion way.
Yeah, it's almost like the baby in Trainspotting.
Yes.
The baby on the ceiling.
Again, that kind of feverish, dreamlike weirdness. That sort of thing that you see when your eyes are deceiving you in the dark at night. Horrible. And then, you know, you get a very quick glimpse of its big smiley face, which it looks like it's been drawn with a crayon or charcoal or something, doesn't it? As it comes down on top of her. And it's just so brilliant how controlled it is in terms of how much of it you see. Yeah. There's that other moment where she sees the neighbour, Mrs. Roach, across the street, and this always terrifies me.
Oh no, that's the scariest bit.
Yeah, and she sees Mrs. Roach watching TV on her armchair, and she kind of looks at her longingly. She looks at everyone else longingly, like she wants to be them. She wants to be, you know, at peace or with somebody else or whatever. And then she looks down to do the washing up, looks back up, and then the Babadook is just stood there behind Mrs. Roach looking back at her. And again, there's no loud music, there's no like burn, there's no big jump scare. It's just there, it's just stood there silently. Yeah. And she's kind of does a double take and then it disappears again. But it's just, that is one of the scariest moments for me.
It's brilliant. And like you say, the brilliance comes from the subtlety, because if it was The Conjuring, it would be like,
yeah, like, exactly.
Zoom in, it's right there. Yeah, in this, everything is about the nuance and and if you happen to pick it up.
Yes, exactly. If you happen to pick it up. And again, it loops back to what we were saying about Gerald's game, which is so terrifying. And I don't want to spoil it for people that haven't seen it, but there's one moment in that.
Don't see it.
It's so good.
Ruin your life. Genuinely, it will ruin your life.
But there is that one moment of that kind of uncanny, you looking at a frame and then you go, oh holy fuck, you know.
God. And it was just like the slow realization, and just the fact that you're allowed a slow realization in a horror film,
it's so much
is
scarier.
very brave, because there is so much about nowadays about the jump scares, like you say, and the immediacy of horror. Whereas actually the slow burners are the things that will just stay with you so much longer. Because a jump scare, it's there, your heart leaps, and then it's gone. Whereas this, it's like the the real drawn in. It's not the scream, it's the breath.
Life is not always as it seems. It can be a wondrous thing, but it can also be very treacherous.
There are moments when, Sam dresses as the magician, puts on the cloak and the hat, and he looks like the Babadook.
And because I think they sort of base the Babadook's teeth on this little boy.
Yes.
On his teeth, because obviously he's got milk teeth.
Yes.
But there are lots of them.
Yes.
You know, they're like little tiny white sharp teeth.
Yes, exactly.
And that's what the Babadook has got, not fully formed. Adult teeth, so it looks really weird in his mouth.
And then of course she ends up pulling out some of her adult teeth, and some real gruesome kind of, there's some gruesome body horror in this as well, which I love. It has everything in it, and there's moments again when her hair gets more and more crazy. She starts walking around with her fingers kind of outstretched, and there's a moment when she gets black all over her. I can't remember what from. Is it when she burnt the book? But her hands go charcoal black, and it's like she is morphing into the Babadook as well. There's so many clever visual cues. It's so rich visually. You can spot something in every frame, it feels like.
There is that bit where she goes to the police station to report that she's being stalked, and again it's that thing of the woman not being believed,
no one helping
she's crazy
her.
And that's such a horrible bit, because she's actually tried to reach out and tried to get help, and they're just not interested without proof. And
that's when she sees what looks like the Babadook in the background,
which again is just like a coat, a uniform hanging up or something. And
again it taps into, aside from all of the themes and the story itself, it taps into that fear that we've all talked about is that coat at the end of the bedroom a coat, or is it not? And it does that so well.
The dressing gown on the door when I was little.
Exactly. It taps into every single kind of weird, uncanny childhood fear, as well as being such a adult meaty movie. It's wonderful.
But I think it is the psychological about this woman who is just having to do everything by herself, and is almost too proud really to take help from other people. And when there's that scene, so there's this her kind of co-worker in it, Robbie, who was in Justin Kurzel's Snowtown, who plays like this serial killer. So he's also in this as like this really, so she plays a carer and he's also a carer, really sweet guy, just really a nice guy. She says that Sam's not well, and he says, I'll go and look after him then, and I'll cover your shift. And so she just leaves and goes to the park by herself, and has does she have ice cream, or she just has a day just away from her son and from anybody.
She can't be with her son, basically. Any excuse to be away from him.
And that whole thing, again going back to the perfect mother, and I bet there are so many mothers who are just looking at that going, yep.
Or what about the moment when she tries to masturbate and then he interrupts her?
She gets her vibrator out, and she's just
it's all those moments where you just think it builds and it builds and it builds this frustration and that kind of bottling and building. It's like a volcano that is on the verge of erupting, isn't it? And then that's when this monster appears. That's when the Babadook comes. And of course there's that moment as well, which is interesting, where she said what she always wanted to be doing, or what she used to do, was write children's books. She wrote children's stories, again, which is like, oh, well, what does that mean?
Do you think she wrote the Babadook then? Do you think she was the one that wrote and illustrated it?
Maybe. Was she?
Sort of
Who knows?
Up state?
Who knows?
Ooh, I hadn't thought about that. That's really interesting.
It feels like, I mean, or again, whether you don't take it as part of the narrative necessarily, but again, it's all part of that. It's almost like she made the film. It's almost like a mother has made a story about what it's like to live with depression and as a children's book. Again, there's that moment when the Babadook gets really, really big, and it's like a huge, all-encompassing thing that fills the room, isn't it? This big black cloud almost that literally weighs down on top of her and presses down on her.
Yeah.
It's like you're saying, it's so scary and disturbing on so many levels.
And then like the cockroaches that she sees, and
for me it felt more like, it's like something dark and evil within, like peel back the walls and you find these horrific things living inside it. It's kind of just beneath the surface. There's a lot of that kind of thing as well, isn't there? That she's just this kind of protective shell, but there's all this darkness in her, basically. And at the end it's, exorcised. Literally all this black goo comes out of her mouth, doesn't it, when she's kind of finally free from it. And then, that strange ending, again, it's a weird one if you take it at face value that this is a monster movie. But if you don't, obviously it's a really kind of interesting and nice ending.
Oh, do you think it's nice?
Well, in some ways I do, in terms of it's not just saying that depression is just something you get over.
Can be right. That's true.
The point of it is you can't get rid of the Babadook, is what they keep saying over and over again. You can't get rid of depression, or, and instead you have to learn to live with it, and you have to learn to get on with it, or placate it, or feed it when it needs feeding, and that's how you deal with it. Because again, it's this, throughout the whole movie, she is not opening up, like you say. She never talks about the husband. She shuts anyone down when they want to talk about it, blah blah blah. And then at the end there's that moment with the social worker when she's like, it's been a rough time, we've never celebrated the birthday, his dad died on his birthday, and she just finally is able to just talk about it, and the little boy goes, he died, driving me to the hospital, and they say it in such a kind of normal everyday way, and the social workers look terrified by it.
It's all right. It's all right. And it's also not that sort of thing, where with so many horrors where you think it's gone and then, something will suddenly open its eye and then it's there.
Yeah.
Because, they don't know that that's happening. Yeah. This is like a real acceptance of it.
Yeah, that's really great. That's really interesting, actually. It's true. I didn't think about it like that, but it's quite a nice twist, isn't it, on that ending of it's always there. The monster's always there in the basement. Yeah. And it's a kind of, it kind of subverts that because they know and keep it there.
Yeah.
How was it?
It's quiet today.
And when Sam sort of says, how was he, or how was it, or something, and she said, it was quiet, he was quiet today. It was quiet today.
So what does that mean in the real world? What's she really doing? Going downstairs and having a good cry, or maybe, whatever it might be.
We're just taking a few minutes
to think about things, and,
for herself without Sam there, and the fact that she can say to Sam, you have to wait outside, this is my time. And he respects that. It's like the putting the boundaries down, which he's never respected her boundaries before, as we tell with the vibrator, etc. He's always doing it with the, I need to rescue you, I want to save you, and he says, I'll kill the monster, I'll smash its head in, and she's sort of saying, you're a child, you don't need to be dealing with this is my problem to deal with, and I will, but thank you for being there for me. There's like a real breath that you kind of take at the end of the film, where you kind of realise they've both learned and come on so far.
Hello. I'm Telly. I'm here to take care of you.
So we saw Tolly with Charlize Theron, which is out at the moment.
Weirdly quite similar.
Which is, we can't. Did we see on the same? Not the same day, was it? But it was.
We saw it a couple of days before.
Within a couple of days of each other, watching the Babadook and this, and that is a lot about, I think, postnatal depression, about exhaustion, in again not being able to sleep, this mother, and there were so many kind of little comparisons. Although Tully isn't a horror, but again, it's like one of her children has got sort of behavioural problems, and his school calls him quirky or something, and this whole film takes place, and the Babadook takes place during a time where Sam is basically like chucked out of school for being a bit different.
Yes.
So he has like 2 weeks before he starts his new school, and it's similar to Tully, where it's like they can't handle a child being a bit different or being a bit sensitive or whatever,
or a
and
mother being a bit different and unconventional as well.
And there's like a scene where in both films where the little boy like is having a tantrum in the car and like kicking the back of the chair of the car, and I was like, oh, it's so interesting how, you know, as a society, it's still the idea of having a child with special needs is a taboo and, you know, weird and hard and
equally a mother who makes
this
mistakes
fear is born
and is flawed, but still loves her kid, but still might not always want to be the stay-at-home mum that makes the cupcakes. You know?
And it's like this thing of like the fear. There's this fear of these children because they don't fit the norm of a stereotypical child who's good. How many children are good?
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
So So I find that really interesting. Society's response to you know, trying to help children as much as mothers.
Yes.
So yeah, it's interesting to see where that will go in the future in horror with creepy kids.
Yeah, well, I think it's, you know, it has, weirdly, in a lot of ways, it has been recognised in horror for quite a long time. You know, again, if you go back to The Innocents, it's this story of, okay, are these kids possessed and evil?
Yes.
Or actually, are they're just lacking parents?
Yeah.
They're
No,
looked
it's that
after by
creepy
this
woman.
Governess. The governess is the most creepy character.
So creepy.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something wrong with her.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And it's got nothing to do with the kids. They are innocents. Yeah. It's amazing. Okay, well, let's move on to Under the Shadow.
Yeah.
این کوفتی که نیامده همینجور بیاد بالا سر ما. مطمئنم با خودش یه چیزایی آورده.
Okay, Under the Shadow. So this was only a couple of years ago, 2016, and it's filmed and set in Iran, although it's a British-funded film, I think.
Yeah.
It was actually nominated for Best British Film, wasn't it, at the BAFTAs? And it's directed by Babak Anvari. This was, I think, his debut feature
interestingly,
film.
They're both debuts that we're talking about today, which is interesting.
Yeah, really, really incredible debuts, both of them. So it's set in 1980s Iran. So this is right in the middle of the Iran-Iraq war in Tehran, which is one of the busiest cities in Iran. And it focuses on this mother. Her name's Shideh, and she's played by Narges Rashidi, and she lives with her husband and her little girl Dorsa, who's about 8 or something, isn't she? Very cute little girl. Yeah, Dorsa.
The chubbiest cheeks.
Yeah.
Adorable.
And they live in this kind of apartment block in the middle of Tehran at a really dangerous time. And, you know, the movie opens and you see images in the background, just in the background of, you know, out windows of bombs going off and that kind of thing. So they're in the middle of this danger zone. And the movie starts with this mother who is basically being told that she's unable to return to university to continue her studies and continue training to be a doctor. She's not allowed to become a doctor ever because she was political and she was involved with some kind of movement a few years ago, probably during the kind of uprising in Iran that had happened a few years earlier, and basically is being punished for that and is now no longer allowed to pursue any kind of independent career. So she's sentenced forever to this life of just being a wife and mother. She's married to a doctor. So she's then kind of trapped in her flat, and the husband has to go away. He gets called up to go to war as a doctor, and she's left alone in her flat with her daughter. And while this is going on, everyone else in the apartment block begins to vacate because they're so worried they're going to get a missile dropped on them. And at one point, a missile does actually land on the roof, and it doesn't go off, but it kills somebody. So there are people dying all around her. Meanwhile, there is something else in the apartment block that seems to have arrived as well. The little girl keeps saying that she's seeing this thing called the jinn, which is like this kind of spirit, this demonic evil entity haunting the building. So there's kind of all kinds of dangers everywhere. There's sort of danger of this supposedly this spirit inside the apartment, and there's danger outside of just society and war and everything else going on around her. So and men. So it's a dangerous situation kind of everywhere you look, really. And it kind of escalates from there, really. So what do you think of this movie? I mean, what was your reaction when you first watched it? Because you had to go and interview the director.
I interviewed Narges Rashidi and Babak Anvari for it and did like a couple of Q&As with them. And I think it's such an excellent movie, and it's just such like you say, like a massive contradictions when it comes down to it's very difficult to pigeonhole, which I really like about it. So like you say, Babak Anvari, it's very much like his film. Because he grew up in Iran. He would have been about the same sort of age that Dorsa is at the time that this was all going on. And I think he kind of came from him talking to his mum about what it was like, because his father was that doctor who went off and had to go to various different war zones. And so the mother was left alone with her, I think 2 boys, alone in a flat in Iran while all these airstrikes were going on. And so so it feels like a very deeply personal movie, I guess, for his mother. And he said, I think he talked about, him and his brother were quite scared, all the time growing up, and they had lots of nightmares and night terrors and were quite scaredy cat kids, really. And the mum was like, I was trying to be so brave the whole time, but I was so scared all the time. And I think that must have fed through to you. And so in turn, this sort of feeds through in this film and then to us, the viewer. First of all, the performances. Narges Rashidi I've never seen her in anything, but she was excellent.
Incredible,
in this. I mean, are we going to keep comparing this to the Babadook?
Well, we don't have to,
because
but
there are so many comparisons.
Yeah.
Because she's this mother who she has this massive blow, like you say. She's grieving her career, and in the same way that Amelia is grieving her husband. So there is like a big hole in her life from the beginning, and she sort of takes it out on her child.
Yes,
she is not a particularly like warm, loving mother. She has moments of it, but you see that when the parents are together, that the child, the Dorsa, is more likely to go for her father, like asks him for things, goes to him naturally. And so the idea then that he leaves them both to be like stuck at home together is quite a frightening thought for everyone involved, and sort of adds to that isolation. She sort of looks for escapism wherever she can, which will be anything from like her next door neighbour who will come and take Dorsa and look after her, to like her Jane Fonda workout video, which is
contraband, which is illegal as well.
So we know that she's quite a rebellious figure anyway. She hates having to cover up her hair, and
she basically she wants to live like a Western woman.
She's a Western woman. She is a Western woman.
She takes like you say, she takes the headscarf off every given moment. She watches American TV, music videos, VHSs. So she's constantly trying to avoid almost this stereotype of being an Iranian housewife and mother, isn't she? And you get exactly like with the Babadook, you get that resentment towards her child because of it. It's not quite as blatant as in the Babadook, is it? It's but there's definitely that there's that frustration that she blames her husband and her daughter really, and resents her husband for being the successful doctor.
And also he does not deal with it well. She gets the news that she can't practice anymore as a doctor, which is obviously devastating for her, and he sort of pats her on the hand and says, well, maybe it's for the best,
because you're better off being a mother.
And you're like, oh my god, I fucking hate you, how dare you. And she obviously feels this as well and doesn't let it go and resents him for it. And it's interesting because then she comes across as quite a cold character, but actually, if you said that to me, I wouldn't bloody speak to you.
Exactly.
And so it's a completely normal response, but because we're so used to seeing women as mothers and wives, that you're like, oh, that's a different response.
She's that taboo mother again, that mother who doesn't just want to be a mother, she wants other things,
of course,
and
but she's still, she obviously still has she's still very protective of her daughter, and again living in that constant fear of being bombed, but she also refuses to just leave and go to her her husband's parents.
Yeah.
And again, it's like being torn between being bombed or being stuck with the in-laws.
Yeah.
And that for her seems to be like a really hard choice.
Yeah.
Even though obviously one is going to be so much worse than the other, but just the idea of being stuck with these people who obviously resent her for being a working mother.
Yeah, you get the feeling, don't you? It doesn't have to tell you, but you get the feeling that probably his parents are traditional. Old-fashioned, probably religious, and she does everything she can to avoid
going.
Everything outside of her flat. She just wants to be on her own, independent.
Yeah.
In her own little. That's the brilliant thing about this film, is that her flat is like her safe space where she can take off her headscarf, watch her workout videos, and be herself and read her books. And yet now there are a million and one reasons why she should be leaving it, and it's that constant conflict, isn't it, throughout the whole movie of what's worse for me, going outside and being arrested for not wearing my headscarf, or being told how to act and this and that, or stay inside with demonic ghosts potentially and missiles coming in through the roof and everything, and your daughter risk losing your daughter. So it's that is the brilliant thing about this movie. Again, it's not just about a haunted house. I mean, we haven't even really talked about the ghosts yet.
Well, no, because it does start off as like a domestic drama.
Yeah.
The ghostly bits don't come till much later on. I would say 45 minutes at least.
Yeah.
And again, it's only 84 minutes long, and so you're literally half of the movie is not a ghost story, but you kind of hear about these superstitions when the neighbor downstairs, another woman who has taken in like her another child basically who comes with his own problems, but she is like the person that Shida really despises, because she's very superstitious and is quite is doesn't really seem to want anything else apart from being a wife and a mother. Although at the same time resents this child that she has to look after because she thinks that he's evil, that has some sort of evil spirit residing in him.
It's a different kind of reason really for that one.
It's very, again, old-fashioned, traditional, and I really like Shida's character for sort of saying, please don't say that sort of stuff. That's not appropriate to say about your a child.
It's almost like in that other flat, there's a whole other film going on, the more old-fashioned movie where this creepy orphan's moved in and he's possessed by demonic activity or something. It's almost like that's a whole other, the kind of cliche evil kid movie going on in that flat. But we're seeing it from this cynical woman's perspective, who's like, he's just this poor traumatized boy.
And she actually does empathise a lot more with him than anybody else does. And so it's Dorsa, the little girl, who kind of first brings in the idea of...
Well, it's when the missile lands. It's basically when that missile comes through the roof and kills that old man upstairs.
Right.
Suddenly something else. That's when suddenly the doll goes missing, and then Dorsa starts seeing or hearing voices and other things going on. So it's like a number of different things there, isn't it? It's like, is it the ghost of the man who's died upstairs? Is it like that basic kind of ghost thing? Or is it something else, like spirits that got let in with the missile, which is how she describes it. The Dorsa, she sort of says something else arrived with that missile sort of thing. Or is it something to do with the little boy and something that he brought with him? And again, all of these associations are, you're bringing death with you. So the little boy had been, had lost his parents in an attack and had arrived and had brought these memories with him, brought this kind of death with him, as did the missile, So it's like death has entered that building, hasn't it?
Again, it's not just Dorsa who sees things. So the man who dies upstairs, his daughter says he was staring at something. He was fine when the missile dropped. It didn't kill him. He saw something just afterwards, and that was the thing that gave him a heart attack. And Shida's like, that's not real. Please don't talk about that in front of my daughter. She's already scared enough. But then you're like, oh, okay, so this isn't just Dorsa's sort of imagination.
No.
It goes much further than that. And that's when it becomes a bit more like, oh, God, this is a real ghost story. They're a ghost. Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah, totally. And just like the Babadook, in terms of, if you move aside all the metaphors, it is a proper ghost supernatural movie. I don't think it ever suggests it's anything else, actually, does it? And when the ghosts start happening, they really start happening. And actually, this movie, I think, has more jump scares in it than the Babadook. It's got a really interesting...
Got full-on fucking jump scares.
It's a bit like...
yourself jump
Yeah,
scares.
yeah. It's a real. We said this when we talked about The Ring a bit, that it's got a kind of, it's like East meets West in the
Yes.
way it's done, because it's obviously this very, very much, you couldn't have it set anywhere else or any other place,
No.
really. It's so specific to Iran and Tehran and this situation, but also it is like a Western. It's got elements of like The Conjuring or one of these types of movies when it gets into it in the second half, and you've got jump scares, you've got things popping out, you've got creepy old people, you've got this scarf, you've got, you know, a little girl who wears a hood, and then is it the kid or is it not?
Oh
You know, all
God.
of those kind of tricks that we've seen in Dark Water and all these other films we've talked about in this series. Yeah, it's really interesting. So it like you say, the first half of it, you'd never even know it was a ghost movie.
No.
Really, it's this really dark drama, domestic drama, and then it really goes balls out ghost movie in the second half, doesn't it?
It does. There's this really sweet scene where Shida and Dorsa are playing. You know, this is when you see, oh, actually, she can be a really lovely mother when she's just playing at tea parties.
Yes.
And just pretending to drink some lovely tea out of a little plastic cup. And, you know, all the dolls are there. And then she switches. I can't remember exactly why. I think does she get the phone call then? Or she's listening to something on the radio? I can't remember. And Dorsa still wants to keep playing. And then she snaps and throws her doll away. And at that point, Dorsa starts whispering to the doll, sort of saying, "Oh God, did she hurt you?" As if this doll has feelings and speaks to her, and so this doll, Kimia, then becomes, from that moment on, it's like a vengeful doll almost, or the implications are that, you know, now that Shida is now a bad mother and will be punished, and the punishment sort of come thick and fast from then.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So the doll is quite a famous trope in horror movies.
Exactly.
Isn't it? You know this
very
more than
much
me.
so. Yeah.
Annabelle is the only one that I can.
Yeah,
really
that's
think
the
of,
recent
but-
one. Obviously, Chucky. I mean, there's millions. Yeah, if you look at Poltergeist, the clown in Poltergeist, and all kinds of things. Yeah.
And this is like a classic rag doll.
Yeah.
With, you know, just sort of staring eyes and and everything sort of revolves around this doll, at least for Dorsa, and so much so that when Kimia, the doll, goes missing, Dorsa refuses to leave the house, and Shida actually agrees that they won't leave until they found the doll.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why they're still in Tehran while these airstrikes are going on. And you're just like, where is the logic in this?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter, leave. Doesn't matter where the doll is, just get out. But it's like they've both been sort of cast under this spell where they can't leave until they find this doll.
Yeah.
And that becomes like a real sticking point, and it's scary and illogical, and you kind of think, but it's just a doll.
Yeah. What did the djinn steal the doll, or did the mum actually hide the doll and cut it up with scissors and put it in the drawer, you know, in order to, you know, convince the daughter to stay, because she wanted to stay too.
But she quite wants to leave, I think, at this point.
At least she makes out like she does, but then she keeps going, okay, we'll stay. And
she
then
says to her husband on the phone, well, we've got to stay because has lost something.
And it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? That's the thing. And you know, and then there's that heartbreaking moment when they get so scared that they run out into the street, but she's not wearing a headscarf, and they get arrested and, you know, threatened with lashings, and then come home again, you know. And there's that moment again when she looks at herself in the mirror and she jumps. It's like a scary horror movie moment, just from seeing herself wearing the headscarf. And it's like her biggest fear, isn't it, of being trapped in that, you know, traditional wife and mother role. Even so much so that the ghost, the demon, is like a big scarf that flows around in the wind, you know, and attacks her. It's just this big giant scarf.
Hijab is,
Exactly. So it all links back to that, doesn't it?
And they sort of say the old days are over, we have values now. This man who's berating her. So she gets berated by men so frequently in this. First of all, the, I don't know what he is, like the doctor guy, medicine, I don't know what
like
he is,
some
like
sort of
university
head.
professor, who says, you know, you can't come back to study here. And it's not just saying, I'm really sorry you can't. He's properly having a go at her for the mistakes that she made. Won't accept her apology. He says, I only want to tell you this face to face so you'd stop coming here. It's never going to happen. Get out. And then as soon as she leaves there in tears, she's then stopped by men on the road. It's just like a sort of check, and he just comes and stares into her car and then lets her pass. So it's all, again, about the power of men, that they can just make you stop and start and leave, and whatever they whenever they want.
And even just when she just gets a handyman in to come and fix something,
it's
she
like
has to quickly, oh God, cover up all the VHSs, put your scarf on, and just in case, he tells somebody.
Yeah, he might be a spy, might be spying, he might be judging, and he will tell someone. Then when her husband is sort of constantly telling her that what she's doing is wrong, and then like you say, the soldiers who stop her in the street when she's not wearing a headscarf, and then the man who arrests her, and then and then her the landlord who tells her off for not shutting the gate properly.
Yeah.
Every single one who she comes in contact with berates her for something, for doing something wrong, for not living up to the ideals that they expect her to.
Yeah.
And that is so suffocating from beginning to end.
Yes.
Doesn't need to be a ghost story.
No, exactly.
That in itself is a horrifying thought.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's so real because it was real. It is real for some people. And that is, over and above. And so then when the actual ghosts come into it, you're already in quite a...
you are. And there's some great scary moments. There's that bit with that I know there are jump scares, but there is a really masterfully executed jump scare where we both went, oh God, because we knew it was coming. It was the second time we'd seen the film.
And it's the third time you'd seen it, I think.
Third time I'd seen it. And it still got me. It still made me jump out of my skin.
Into your... I was just absolutely leapt. I was just freaked out.
Yeah.
I can't remember. It's like a hand punching through the...
Yes. So she hears a noise. She wakes up in the night, hears a noise outside the window and walks over to the window. It's a classic thing, really. But the way the camera moves is quite misleading and it makes it look like she's about to back away from the window. And then this hand just comes straight through at her and then it jump cuts back to her waking up. There's a lot of moments like that where it's a bad dream.
Yes.
But they're really effective.
Yeah, it's better than a lot of dream-like ones. Because then she goes to the window, she wakes up, goes to the window, and then something else flashes past and makes her leap backwards. Yeah. And so it's just like, whether she's waking or asleep, you don't know. The realities are so blurred by this point.
Yes. And there's a creepy moment that's, again, a bit like what we were talking about with the Babadook, where it wasn't a jump scare, but this kind of just horrible realisation of there's an old man stood in the doorway of her bedroom. And that's a terrifying moment. And again, quite low-key, that one.
Yeah, because I only really noticed it when you went, oh, God.
Yeah.
Like, oh, God.
Yeah, that kind of, again, it's got those horrible kind of more subtle, scary moments as well.
And because the camera sort of lingers on it lingered on him, and then he kind of turns around and runs out, and then you see him disappearing into this crack in the ceiling where the missile originally hit. And so it's not like a freak out jump scare moment, but it's like, okay, oh God, so was that a ghost? Was that the ghost of the old man that died? Is it him that's kind of running riot? What's happening? And it's so many different possibilities.
Yes.
Because we already know that Dorsa has been talking to a ghost, but it wasn't an old man, it was a woman.
Yes, exactly.
And so you're like,
so
okay,
how many
there are multiple ghosts.
There?
Yeah. What are they? What is it? Yeah. So that's horrible.
But of course, there is just, death everywhere around them. So it's a possibility, that these spirits could be everywhere. Yeah, it's horrible. There are some amazing moments like that. And there's the classic kind of misdirection moment that has popped up in a lot of movies before. And it reminded me a little bit of Don't Look Now, even.
So
but, she puts on her coat with her hood up, the little daughter, and they run down to the basement.
Coat.
Yeah, her little duffel coat. She grabs her by the hand of the mother and runs down to the basement with her. And they constantly, Babak Anvari kind of keeps the daughter out of focus in the background, so you can't really see whose hand she's holding as she runs down to the basement.
Yeah.
And then they get to the basement and then they hear her screaming upstairs.
The little girl,
and you think, oh, fuck, whose hand was she holding, first of all? And, oh, fuck, she's left her poor daughter screaming on her own upstairs, locked in the flat while they're under attack. And that your heart is racing for so many various reasons. And then it's kind of a double bluff, isn't it? So she then runs upstairs to what we think is the real daughter. And then it's that weird, horrible demon thing under the bed with Hugh's teeth that kind of lunges at her. It's brilliant. I mean, so it throws like every scare in the book at you at that moment.
Because it's sort of done in such a short space of time that you don't really have time to catch your breath, and it's just one thing after another, and just that fear of the unknown, what's happening. So then she runs back downstairs again and realizes that it was her daughter the whole time, and she'd sort of kicked her away as she ran upstairs, and his daughter's going, I can't believe you left me again. And she has like a bleeding nose, and oh God, that's awful, because because you're with her, you're like, yeah, that thing's a demon, and then you realise it was her daughter the whole time.
Yeah, totally.
And you feel duped.
It's really
ashamed.
clever. It kind of subverts the stereotype there from the horror. And there are some, because the daughter's brilliant though, because she does get properly cross with her mum all the time, doesn't she? And there's a moment when they actually just have a full-on fight.
Yeah.
Like she just jumps at her and starts biting her.
Doesn't she? Yeah. So the mother slaps the daughter, and instead of just being really upset, the daughter then just like attacks her back, which I loved, because you never see that.
No, and then to begin with, you think, is the daughter possessed? Because they keep emphasising that maybe she's going to get possessed by the djinn.
Yeah.
But then no, it's just like, no, they're just full-blown fighting each other, and then the sirens go off, and they both just kind of stop what they're doing and then run away together. So it's like, no, you were just a mother and child just having a full-on physical fight.
Yeah, like she bites her arm, and like is trying to slap her, and so the mother's trying to keep her arm's length, and like has her hands around her little squidgy cheeks.
It's brilliant, and it is, I mean, it's kind of disturbing and then weirdly kind of endearing at the same time.
Yes,
I found
it's cathartic.
Yeah, it's cathartic.
It is cathartic, because there is so much of that, I don't, being unsure the whole time of what is going on, whereas this is so just like visceral and just emotional and furious, and you're like, I recognise this.
You recognise both points of view.
Just full on frustration and I really liked that scene.
Yeah, it was really good. Yeah, there is some, and that's the thing. I mean, I think that's the thing with both these movies, isn't it? Is that you could talk about them to death about all kinds of things, leaving aside the fact that they're horror movies almost, and then still talk about how brilliant they are as horror movies. But this has just got so much interesting character drama and character work, even with like, what is she, about a 6-year-old girl? Is such a bit older, but she's such a brilliantly written and performed little girl as well.
Absolutely.
And again, like the Babadook, it's just this mother and child pretty much throughout most of the film in this one space.
It's also interesting about like the repetition of the neighbour, the good neighbour who will help and step in to be childcare.
Exactly.
And they sort of do that in a just quite pragmatic way of just, any mother who's by herself needs somebody to be able to rely on to drop her kid off with.
Another woman, always.
Another woman. And so, and then there is, again, that sort of feeling that she has a friend. And so then the loss is even greater, where in Under the Shadow, the friend leaves because of the strikes. And
they're completely all left, aren't they?
And it's so scary, but at the end, even the landlord leaves, and it's just these two in the building with all these ghosts.
Yeah, and this hole in the roof.
Oh,
it's
God.
wonderful. It's so much like, I haven't even mentioned, but the Guillermo del Toro movie, The Devil's Backbone, which literally starts, is set in the Spanish Civil War, and it literally starts with a missile landing in the middle of this orphanage, and the whole movie is set around this unexploded bomb, and then these spirits come to life. So there's so many parallels to that as well, and just this feeling that just war and death are just weighing on them, constantly. Yeah, it's brilliant. It's such such a clever idea. So what did you make of the ending? Because it ends with, I suppose with the Babadook, it's like, right, we're gonna stay where we are, we're going to learn to deal with it, we're going to beat it. Whereas in some ways, like you said, that in some ways was a very sad ending, but also I found quite a uplifting ending. And with Under the Shadow, it's kind of bittersweet, because the mother has to give in eventually. She has to leave her safe space.
Yeah.
It's not safe, obviously, but it was kind of her safe space, and go off to what I'm assuming they're going to drive to her in-laws.
Yes.
Her husband is probably dead.
Oh, God, what?
Did you not think? I mean, they're on the phone and then they get cut off, and I just assumed he's dead.
No,
and
I
especially
did not
then when
get
she
that.
hears another version of the husband, which is actually the demon,
that was quite
or whatever,
horrible.
over the phone. So you just think, I thought he's dead.
Oh, God, I didn't even think about that.
And then she drives off to what will probably be her in-laws, and she's going to be stuck forever
life.
and it's.
But then I think, if you think her husband's dead, then she'd actually maybe have more of a chance of striking out on her own and reinventing herself and maybe moving abroad. I don't know. There is more hope, I think.
Definitely. And it's kind of a bit of both, isn't it? And it's like they've both learnt to let go of what they were obsessed with. And for the mother, it was the book, the medicine, the book that her mum gave her.
Yeah.
And then for the daughter, it was the doll. And you see both objects just left behind.
Well,
at the
they
end.
always say that if the djinn has a bit of like something that you treasure most dearly, then they will never leave you.
Yes.
And so, you know, they've left a part of the doll behind, the doll's head, and they've left her most treasured possession, this book, behind. And so then it's like, right, so they are it is that sort of wink wink ending of they will never be free of the djinn.
Exactly.
But then you wonder about, have they let go of them? Is she over the fact?
Probably not. You're right, and that's the thing, and it's going to follow them, isn't it? And there's that kind of weird shot where you see those two objects and then the camera kind of goes up and you just to the hole in the roof, and you just hear the wind blowing, and then it ends. And it's sorry, go on.
Yeah, sorry. Well, it was just a weird ending, wasn't it? That it ended on not on the doll and not on the book, but on the hole in the ceiling. And it was just like a sort of reminder of the damage that had been done by the war. It sort of goes back to not really to do with the film, but just about the politics and about the war and the lives that it sort of split open and left this gaping hole in. That's the only sort of thing that I could take away from
just
that.
A wreckage. Or, you know, interesting, I've really just thought, since you said that about the djinn, because that's true, you know, it could just be that it's like the spirits are following them, they're coming after them, they've gone out through that hole in the roof and they're following them. You know, it's like we see them down here with the book and the doll, and then they float up through the roof, sort of thing, or they're leaving or something, who knows. But
who knows?
Yeah, it's a nice kind of ambiguous ending again, where you can kind of make up your own mind. Is that a happy ending? Is that a sad ending? Is that a scary ending?
All of the above.
Which do you prefer?
Oh God, that's really hard. I've seen both twice.
Yeah, I think I've seen both 3 times now. I think for me, especially on the third time, it's the Babadook has a bit more rewatch value. And maybe it's just because Under the Shadow, it does end up kind of veering into the more jump scare territory towards the end, where I suppose that will deplete a little bit more and more the more you see it.
Yeah.
Whereas I do genuinely kind of gasp and admire new things in the Babadook every single time.
Yeah, I mean, I like stuff about both. They're both very original. They both managed to find something very original in horror, but at the same time use other horror tropes to their sort of, you know, they kind of mold them around what they need to.
Yeah, and you can kind of either, if you get the references or you don't, you can still appreciate these films. You know, you don't have to know what they're referencing.
No.
Yeah.
I think there are I mean, just I love the subtleties. Like in Under the Shadow, the whole way through, pretty much, the mother refuses to call the doll Kimia. She refuses to call it a her. She calls it an it.
Yeah.
And just that little subtle thing that she has, that she can't bow down to her daughter's sort of giving it a personality or whatever, that refusal just says so much about her personality. And similar things in the Babadook. I think there are just so many layers to both, and I like that you can just peel away little bits of them at a time and uncover new readings. And you know, I think they're both very clever, and obviously, like, so much passion has gone into both of them.
Just both. I mean,
they don't feel flippant in any way. There is so much more to them.
Yeah,
you know that, you know, it's so different from when we were talking about the slashers.
Yeah, exactly.
Where you kind of want to make people laugh as well as frighten them.
Yeah, this couldn't be more different. And you know, both made by first-time filmmakers, incredible, like so much more accomplished than many old veteran directors can achieve, and both incredible lead performances by, you know, a woman and a child, you know, in both of them that are just astounding as well, really. In some ways, you know, Under the Shadow, Najiz Rashidi is more real. I think, you know, the Babadook is so stylized, and it deliberately so, and it's wonderful, but it is like, it's much more of a kind of fable or storybook, whereas Under the Shadow it feels really
it's just
real,
like a snapshot of someone's life, which is, you know, and the fact that Babak Anvari wrote this from his experiences, you can tell, you know, that the fear that like he said, like I was saying earlier, just that sort of the childlike fear of not being able to make sense of everything, and so having to put it into other things like the doll, and the fact that the doll was sort of almost representing her dad, or you know, because I think he gave it to her, and then was gone, and,
Yeah.
and she couldn't leave without it, you know, all of that sort of stuff. And
yeah, it's a very Guillermo del Toro-y thing, actually. It's kind of like you get the Pan's Labyrinth with the war, and it's that kind of like child mind dealing with
Yes.
the horrors of adulthood kind of thing.
And just seeing like the complexities of the mother-child relationship on screen, you
Yeah.
know, seeing those taboos opened up and explored. I will never stop finding that fascinating.
Yeah.
And the whole idea that, you know, women's lives are supposed to stop or at least be put on pause.
Yeah.
And in both these films, that sort of trying to kick back against that. Yeah.
And it's nice that neither of them are American movies, neither of them are Hollywood movies, you know, and both just, I guess, just have that. It's just, you know, it's just something a bit new and different about the way they're filmed and the setting and everything else as well.
And just like, it's so important that films like this people take the risk, you know, like the producers like Wigwam who made Under the Shadow, you know, it's like a Iranian Persian, like Farsi speaking movie set in Tehran in the 80s, and it's a horror, and they backed it, you know, they put money into that, and not many, you know, British producers would kind of back a Farsi speaking film.
No, totally.
And you know, I think it paid off.
Totally.
Completely.
And like you say, it's got that perfect balance of East and West to it, which is what makes it, you know, I think what makes it widely appealable, I think, for people. Yeah, don't be put off by subtitles. Although we started watching on Netflix and it dubbed it, didn't it?
That was
and we were
terrifying.
like, turn it off.
This American voice coming out of
this brilliant actress's mouth.
Yeah, it was so wrong.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a dubbed movie?
No, never.
I mean, apart from like obviously like the old Italian giallos or whatever.
Yes, although I suppose they are dubbed, but yeah, no, and that's the thing that puts me off even with those. You know, I can't handle dubbed.
No.
I always watch subtitles.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, if you get this Under the Shadow is available on Netflix in the UK, but just make sure you watch it subtitled.
Yes, and also what I quite liked about it was that you just like you can't go on your phone. You can't be distracted.
Exactly. You have to concentrate, and that's nice.
Yeah.
Both movies, I think, warrant concentration. Yeah, because they're both not quite what you think as well, which is nice. I remember when the Babadook first came out, and I just thought, the title just sounds so ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, okay, this is just going to be another silly, you know, schlocky Annabelle type movie or something, you know, and it was
so far
such a
from
pleasant
that.
surprise. Yeah, exactly.
Because she just wanted to create something so different, like something completely new.
Yeah.
Which you really admire,
Yeah.
and that, you know, she actually managed to do that and to create something which, as you say, is now in like the collective sort of vernacular.
It's a gay, isn't it even some sort of gay?
Yeah, but I think basically Netflix put it by accident under their LGBTQ titles, and so then it became like this Babadook is gay, and
This
it became
gay
like, this
icon.
iconic, which I love.
It's amazing. You can look it up and you'll find like it's like kind of rainbow coloured Babadooks and stuff, isn't it? It's
so
brilliant.
good.
Yeah.
There was even like a thing where I think it was after It came out that the clown and the Babadook were like in a relationship or something ridiculous.
Amazing.
You haven't even done your Babadook impression.
Babadook. It's not very good.
No, it's terrible. You do it much scarier to me.
I do it when I'm knocking
in the night.
Yes, exactly. When I'm knocking on the bathroom door at night. Thank you so much for joining me again.
Yeah, okay.
Something I forgot to ask you last time, so I'm going to ask you now. What's your favourite horror movie?
Oh, for fuck's sake. I was quite upset that you did Peeping Tom without me.
Yes, Peeping Tom's one of your favourites.
Peeping Tom is one of my favourites.
What is it about Peeping Tom you like?
It was just so unexpected, and I think it was the first one where I really sort of felt for the protagonist. And yeah, I just love that it kind of, you know, flipped the perspective on the killer and the victim in Peeping Tom. So yeah, I'll go with Peeping Tom.
All right,
as my
nice.
favourite horror.
And scariest ever movie?
Oh God.
I think the most scared I've seen you watching a movie is The Fly, David Cronenberg's The Fly.
Oh my God, don't even talk about The Fly. Yeah, The Fly is horrendous. The Fly is one of the most horrendous things I've ever seen.
It is the most disturbed I've ever seen you during a movie when I showed you The Fly.
People enjoy that film. Like I can see the appeal of horror. I cannot see the appeal of The Fly. It repulses me to my core.
But it was just so. But it's like the films we've been talking about tonight. It's this wonderful like two-hander.
No, but it's
these
so
brilliant
revolting.
characters.
It just makes everything clench, and every like fibre of my being is like vomiting. The fly just damaged me.
Yes, I noticed. Yeah, you were genuinely angry with me for showing it to you.
Yeah, I don't know why you did.
I thought you might have quite liked it.
I think you were trying to break up with me and that was your way of doing it.
I think it's a masterpiece, The Fly. Incredible, but I won't make that mistake again.
But also any like sort of alien, I do like alien movies as well, you know, so sci-fi horror I really enjoy.
Yes.
So The Thing is just a masterpiece, as is Aliens.
Yeah.
But I don't know where people stand on whether they're horrors or whether they're sci-fi.
Definitely horrors.
Are you going to do like a strand of that of like
100%.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. It's all horror.
Fine for fine.
Yeah.
Anything with Kurt Russell in killing aliens, so happy about.
Yeah, I'm all for anything with Kurt Russell in as well. Yeah, sounds good. Thank you so much for joining me again.
That's okay.
Where can people find you on the interweb if they want to find you?
So I currently host a documentary series for Radio 4 called Seriously. I also do various things for BAFTA and the BFI, so sometimes on the news, various news channels talking about movies, and I've just started writing for Penguin, sort of talking about their book to film adaptations. So have a look on their website for some of my articles. I did one on Frankenstein recently.
You did, on different adaptations of Frankenstein.
Yeah. So have a read of that, see what you think, see if you agree.
And that is it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to my wonderful guest, Rhianna Dhillon. So what did you think of this week's show? What do you think of these two fantastic movies? Send me your thoughts. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com, or you can find me on Twitter @evolutionpod, or on Facebook. That's facebook.com/evolutionofhorror. If you want to discuss this week's episode or these movies or anything else horror related with other fellow listeners, come and join the discussion group. That's the Evolution of Horror discussion group that is available on Facebook. I am keen to hear feedback from people. I'm going to read some emails out next week, so get in touch with me. Tell me what you think of the ghost subgenre in general. Tell me what you think of this series of films that we've explored. Were there any movies that were off your radar that you've since discovered since listening to the podcast? I'd love to hear from you. And of course, I want to hear what your favourite ghost movie is. And once more, that email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. So next week, well, we won't be discussing any movies in depth next week. We're going to have a little look back at what we've learned over the last 19 weeks. I'm going to discuss some of my favourites and my top 10 ghost movies, and I'm going to be reading some listener feedback. And then, keeping with the tradition that I set up in the Slasher series, I'm going to be joined by London's movie trivia king, Brian Ryan, who is going to quiz me on all things ghosts. I did pretty badly with slashers. I'm hoping I might do better this time around, but probably not, let's be honest. But it's a great chance for you to also listen and play along. So join me next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.